if you don't like the changes that we've made, I say the door is open and you can leave.
The warning signs were there, but the UK ignored every single one, and now the collapse they never imagined has arrived. It didn't start with protests or politics. It started with a quiet statistic buried deep in a migration report. An 80% drop in Africans choosing the UK, a number so shocking it sent London into panic mode overnight. For decades, the UK believed Africa would always look to them, always choose them, always need them. But as the world changed, Africa changed faster.
This is unbelievable, guys. Did you know that 700,000 people left the UK last year? The highest on record emigration out of the UK in recorded history. And in the USA, I was checking the data, and there are no official numbers, but people are saying that it's actually worse in America. It's in the millions of people that have been exiting since, a certain person got into office. And the crazy thing is that they keep telling us that the biggest issue right now,
a rising continent with booming cities, modern universities, expanding industries, and global auctions suddenly realized something powerful, and it didn't need the UK anymore. And it didn't see the shift coming. Flights that once overflowed now arrive half empty. Campuses built around international talent sit quieter than ever. British businesses that depended on African investors are beginning to feel a chill they can't explain, but Africa can. What happened wasn't random, and it wasn't accidental.
One of the key reasons people are leaving is not necessarily tax. I think one of the biggest reasons people are leaving is actually safety and security. I actually think that some of the tax stuff is slightly over-egged sometimes on why people are leaving. Normally when someone that's just sold their business for 10 million plus wants to leave the country, most people that I know firsthand are normally saying it's for family or safety and stuff like that. Obviously the tax doesn't help.
If I say to you that
we are witnessing a mass exodus of the UK. Ladies and gentlemen, you are going to see what happens when all the hard-working, job-creating, tax-paying citizens of the United Kingdom up and leave and go, fuck it, we may as well go and live somewhere else. So there we go. Number of Britons leaving the UK significantly higher than previously thought, new data shows. 257,000 people left last year, compared to what they estimated as being 70.
It was the result of a new African mindset, confident, selective, global one that refuses to settle for outdated systems or unwelcoming policies, one that chooses dignity over tradition. The UK thought Africa would always come back, but the new Africa isn't going back, it's moving forward. And now the world is watching the consequences unfold in real time.
We decided to leave the UK and move to Africa instead of buying a property. Here are 3 reasons why.
We can buy a house at any time, and we've got no kids, no mortgage, no pets, and there's nothing holding us back, so why not?
We both wanted to make this change, so we're lucky that we both have the same opinions on the quality of life in the UK.
And it's a great story. This journey is something that we'll be able to tell our kids about in the future, and you all get to follow along as it happens.
Is immigration a problem in the UK?
No.
Why'd you say no?
Because it's fundamental to our existence.
Oh, why'd you say that?
Because we need it. We don't have enough people being born in this country, we need immigrants. It's simple.
Why does the UK fear immigration?
We're told to.
By who?
The elites that own us. So the capitalists and the billionaires that are in charge that really own us and own our parties, mostly the Tories, but now Labour as well, they tell us to fear it because they need someone to blame for our problems when really they're the ones causing our problems.
Do you think we have overpopulations in major cities?
I've said goodbye to all my friends and family. This is going to be my last night in London. The racists have got me leaving. I had to get rid of my contact lenses. I don't know if I can maintain my subscription where I'm going. So this is it now. I'm hoping to find one of the bridges just to watch the sunset one final time on my final night. Found a lovely church. I prayed with some people.
The reports began quietly, buried deep within travel databases and migration statistics, the kind that analysts skimmed past without much thought. But then something unexpected happened. The trend didn't stop. It accelerated. By the end of the year, officials in the UK stared at the newest data in disbelief, an 80% drop in Africans choosing the UK as their destination. It wasn't gradual, it wasn't subtle, it was a collapse, swift and deliberate, as if an entire continent had collectively decided to turn away. At first, the UK tried to explain it away. They blamed global instability, new visa policies, shifting academic cycles, but none of those explanations held up. Travel to Canada, Asia, the Middle East, and the rest of Europe continued to rise. African students and investors weren't staying home. They were just avoiding one specific country. The UK didn't want to admit what was obvious. Something had changed between them and Africa, and it wasn't in London's favor. In cities across Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, Egypt, South Africa, Morocco, and Rwanda, the same conversations echoed. People were tired. They were tired of the cold reception, the micro-restrictions disguised as policies, the feeling of being an afterthought in a country that once begged for African partnerships but refused to treat Africans as equals. The UK had long assumed that Africa would always choose them by default. Language ties, historical connections, old trade routes, these were seen as guarantees, unbreakable and permanent. But Africa had changed, the world around it had changed, and the UK had not. The turning point wasn't dramatic. It didn't happen in one conference or one speech. It was a series of small decisions, each one accumulating quietly but relentlessly. Universities in the UK began raising fees for international students while cutting scholarships intended for African applicants. Visa processing slowed, sometimes stretching 2 months without explanation. Job opportunities after graduation became harder to secure. The message was subtle, but it was clear. Preference no longer existed. Meanwhile, other countries moved swiftly. Canada introduced a new streamlined visa program tailored specifically for Africa's fast-growing student population. China expanded its full-funded scholarship initiatives and opened regional offices in Nairobi and Lagos. The United Arab Emirates launched Africa-focused business visas designed to bring in investors and young professionals. Even Germany relaxed its immigration requirements, recognizing Africa's rising influence in technology, energy, and infrastructure. Africa, for once, had options, many of them better, warmer, and more welcoming. In Nairobi, a group of young engineers gathered at a technology hub, comparing the programs offered in Germany and Singapore. The UK was mentioned only once, quickly dismissed as too expensive, too slow, too unwelcoming. In Lagos, medical students filled out applications for new partnerships in Qatar and Canada. In Accra, a room full of entrepreneurs attended an investment event promoting opportunities in South Korea and the Netherlands. The UK wasn't even represented. The shift was cultural as well as economic. Africa's new generation wanted dignity, respect, and modern partnership. They wanted places that valued their talent, not countries. Clinging to outdated hierarchies, social media played a huge role. Stories spread quickly, videos of Africans facing harsh border checks, posts describing months of unexplained visa delays, testimonies of students being denied opportunities simply because the system was no longer designed with them in mind. The UK continued to act as if nothing was changing, as if its position was uncontested. But every month, the numbers fell further. Airlines adjusted their schedules as flights from Accra, Lagos, and Addis Ababa to London began flying half-empty. Universities projected financial losses they had never seen before. Small British towns that relied heavily on international student spending noticed quieter streets, fewer rentals, shrinking businesses. But the real shock came when investors began pulling away. Africa's wealthy business class, which had previously favored London for banking, property, and corporate registrations, started choosing Dubai, Singapore, and Johannesburg instead. High-end neighborhoods in the UK felt the difference. Representatives from London's financial sector traveled across Africa, trying to understand why deposits were shrinking and investment accounts were closing. The simple truth was one the UK had long avoided. Africa no longer needed them, at least not in the way it once did. Back in Nairobi, a trade analyst described it perfectly during a local broadcast. The UK, she said, had spent too long assuming Africa would remain loyal out of tradition, but loyalty requires reciprocity, and Africa had outgrown dependency. It was building its own industries, forming its own alliances, shaping its own destiny. Choosing the UK no longer felt like progress. It felt like stepping backward. Countries like Kenya and Rwanda became continental hubs for education and technology, reducing the need to study abroad at all. Nigeria and Egypt launched major infrastructure expansions that attracted European and Asian companies. South Africa strengthened its manufacturing partnerships with Brazil and India. Morocco deepened its trade ties with the Middle East. Everywhere, Africa's focus shifted outward but not toward the UK. In London, the conversations grew more desperate. Officials gathered behind closed doors, reviewing the numbers, listening to advisors who warned that losing Africa's youth, talent, and investors would have long-term consequences. But the policies remained unchanged. The rhetoric softened, but the system stayed rigid. The distance widened back on the continent. A sense of empowerment filled the air. People weren't choosing the UK anymore because they didn't feel they had to, and for the first time, Africa wasn't looking outward for validation. It was looking inward, building strong regional ties and redefining its place in the world. The 80% drop wasn't a random statistic. It was a message, a declaration, a turning of the page. The UK had assumed Africa would always come. Africa had realized it didn't need to. The shift had begun, and the world was only starting to understand its scale. The UK realized too late that the shift wasn't just external. It was internal, cultural, and deeply philosophical. For decades, African countries had been told that choosing the UK was a sign of advancement, a pathway to stability, an entry into global opportunity. But a new generation was rewriting the narrative. They saw the world differently. They grew up with smartphones, online education, borderless knowledge, and a rising sense of continental pride. They didn't aspire to repeat the paths of their parents. They wanted something new, something the UK no longer represented. In Kenya, a university auditorium filled with bright students erupted in applause when a local professor announced a new partnership with universities in the Netherlands and South Korea. When he mentioned the UK, the room fell silent, not out of hostility but irrelevance. The partnership simply didn't excite them anymore. The world had become larger, richer, more diverse, and the UK was no longer the only door to global success. Across Nigeria, after a televised debate featuring economists and young tech founders, a striking sentiment emerged. The UK's policies felt outdated: regulatory barriers, rigid immigration rules, endless wait times they made the country feel closed, even discouraged innovation. Meanwhile, Dubai and Singapore rolled out digital nomad visas tailored specifically for African entrepreneurs. Canada offered work permits attached to tech accelerators. Malaysia introduced new medical study programs with guaranteed internships. Africa wasn't limited by colonial-era pathways. It now had a global buffet. In Ghana, a survey among graduates revealed that while the UK used to be their top choice for higher studies, it now ranked fifth, behind Canada, Germany, the Way, and South Korea. The majority said they wanted countries that treated them as partners, not migrants. They wanted to feel valued, respected, and recognized for their skills, not constantly evaluated through suspicion and restrictive systems. Meanwhile, in London, the ripple effects grew sharper. University admissions offices sent confused emails to their partner institutions in Kenya and Malawi, asking for clarity on why applicant numbers had plummeted. Some British schools that typically received thousands of applications from Africa barely crossed a few hundred. Housing landlords in cities like Birmingham and Leeds noticed international rentals sitting empty for months. Restaurants and businesses near campuses struggled with declining foot traffic. The drop wasn't temporary, it was structural. African governments also began encouraging the trend. Rwanda promoted its expanding innovation ecosystem, offering tax incentives to young citizens who chose to build businesses at home rather than abroad. Egypt launched a national program focused on strengthening the technological workforce, reducing the need for students to leave. Kenya expanded its medical training centers. Nigeria invested heavily in its creative and tech industries, promising grants to young entrepreneurs who chose to remain or return after studying elsewhere. The continent was awakening in a way the UK had failed to predict, but the deeper reason behind Africa's pull away wasn't only economics or policy, it was emotional. Generational memory began shifting. The old narratives about the UK being the gateway to the world felt outdated. African youths wanted places where they felt welcomed, not tolerated. They wanted to thrive without constantly justifying their presence. They wanted to live where opportunities matched their ambition, not where the past shaped their identity. Social media accelerated the transformation. Countless videos circulated of Africans celebrating new lives in Qatar, Germany, the Way, and Canada. They shared stories of support, easier transitions, and entire communities ready to help them grow. In contrast, videos of Africans facing hostile immigration attitudes and restrictive environments in the UK went viral weekly. The message spread quickly. There were better options. African influencers with millions of followers frequently posted content urging young people to explore global opportunities without limiting themselves to traditional destinations. They highlighted Asia's booming industries, Europe's scholarships, the Middle East's infrastructure investments, and Africa's own renaissance. Their message was transformative. Africa was becoming a place people returned to, not fled from. The UK no longer held the psychological or cultural pull it once did, but the most powerful shift was happening within African communities themselves. Families who once saved for years to send their children to the UK were now choosing countries that felt more promising. Many encouraged their children to study in Morocco, Egypt, or South Africa, believing these regional hubs were now better aligned with Africa's future. It wasn't about abandoning the idea of studying abroad. It was about choosing destinations that matched Africa's modern identity. Africa saw itself rising, and the UK wasn't rising with it. Meanwhile, British policymakers scrambled for answers. They commissioned reports, launched inquiries, held private meetings with African diplomats, and even considered rolling back certain policies. But the change required was deeper than discussions. It required a transformation in outlook, one the UK wasn't yet ready for. They wanted African talent without offering African dignity. They sought loyalty without reciprocation, and Africa was done accepting one-sided relationships. The 80% drop became a symbol, a signal of a new world order. African students, investors, workers, and entrepreneurs weren't rejecting opportunity. They were choosing better opportunities. They weren't turning their backs on the UK out of anger, but out of clarity. They had seen a world where they were valued, and they preferred it. Cities across Africa began investing in their own global identity. Ghana hosted massive conferences focused on African entrepreneurship. Nigeria's tech industry exploded, attracting billions in foreign investments. Kenya's tourism sector soared as more Africans traveled. Within the continent instead of abroad, Egypt expanded its industrial zones, becoming a manufacturing hub for Europe and Asia. South Africa strengthened its financial markets. Everywhere, African countries were growing in confidence and global relevance. The UK wasn't collapsing, but it was losing something powerful: influence in night markets across Kigali, in bustling cafes in Nairobi, in tech hubs in Lagos. A single idea echoed across the conversations. Of Africa's youth, the world was open, and the UK was no longer their only path. Africa's future was no longer tied to countries that refused to evolve. The continent was moving forward, reshaping the global balance, choosing partners who respected its rise.